We do what we call, it's called hyperfocus. We can hyperfocus on it and brings us flow. It brings us internal peace and happiness. Things start falling into place. It kind of made sense. Yeah, that's why I've been experiencing the world differently. That's because I'm also autistic.
Welcome to the Be Better broadcast. We have a very special conversation for you today because this is a topic that we haven't yet discussed on the Be Better broadcast. It is the topic of neurodiversity, what it means to be neurodiverse, who is neurodiverse, how many people out there actually think differently and operate differently, and does operating and thinking differently mean that you have an advantage or a disadvantage, and how can we use this neurodiversity in order to be the best version of ourselves, in order to grow our career, and in order to grow the relationships with the people around us that mean so much. We're going to talk all about neurodiversity. And this is a topic that I am not very educated in. So in order to have this conversation, we've invited a very special guest, Kanan Tekchandani, to discuss this with me so I can ask all of my questions that will help you to learn about this topic and learn how to use it, especially if you find yourself being a neurodiverse individual. Welcome to the Be Better broadcast. When you take away even just one thing from this conversation with Kanan, please share the show with just one other person who could use it as well. You are the reason the broadcast has grown the way that it has over the past 2 years, because you are the best part of the Be Better team. And for those who don't know Kanan Tekchandani is a neurodiverse coach and a relationship whisperer. As a neurodivergent herself, she connects with her clients intuitively. Her mission is to empower other neurodivergent adults and families to live a life of happiness, fulfillment, and success. Kanan is a very peaceful individual. I've learned that just from following her for the past 3 or 4 months since we first spoke, and the few minutes that we spoke before this. So I know this is going to be a very relaxed, zen conversation that's going to leave you with some insights to use in your own life. Kanan, it is great to have you on the Be Better broadcast. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks.
All the way from the UK, all the way from across the ocean. Pierre Bowsy introduced the two of us, and he said, Brandon, you've got to meet Kanan. And here we are, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. So thank you for all the great works that you're doing in this neurodivergent world that you have dived into.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really important place, and I think we need more people to speak up for us. So I just want to do my bit.
Let me ask you, how do you describe neurodiversity? What does it mean necessarily?
So I guess it means that you're wired differently, the way you think. What does that look like day to day? That could be someone who's got ADHD or autism, what used to be called Asperger's, giftedness, a combination. It also covers things like dyslexia, dyspraxia. Even if you've been in let's say a car accident and your brain is changed in the way it's wired, that's also comes under neurodiversity. But what I cover is people who have been born with some kind of neurodiversity, so they're different thinking.
Gotcha. See, that's very interesting to me because you mentioned a lot of things there. And do you feel that, is there such a thing as normal thinking? Or do you believe that we all think in our own different way? Because when we look at neurodiversity, we're essentially speaking of a difference in thinking. Do you believe that in a way we're all neurodivergent, or is there a normal baseline that you can draw from?
So some of the language around this is so neurotypicals refer to what most of the population, how their brain is wired. So the average brain, should we say. And then outside of the average is where neurodivergents are. So there's less of us, and we are, thinking quite differently from most people. So yes, within neurotypical people, of course, there's differences in thinking, but we have a bigger leap. Us neurodivergents think much more differently. And so it's got to be acknowledged that, yeah, we don't fall within that typical. Some people call it normal, but who's to define normal? The way we think is our normal, and the way neurotypical thinks, that's their normal.
100%. Yeah. I ask you that because I have a close friend of mine who has trained teams with me for years and years. And he says that he's ADHD. And, he says that he has trouble focusing on things. He's always going from one topic to another topic. And to me, and to him at this point, it's not just me who says, I think you have a superpower, but that ability, the ability he has to focus on something that is super important to him and laser focus on it, really is a superpower in itself. So it's very interesting because I feel that society, especially through me going through elementary school, middle school, high school, so the early 2000s up to now, I feel that we've looked at things such as ADD and dyslexia and other things that fall under the umbrella of neurodivergence, and we look at it as something that is wrong. We look at it as something that you were born with a disadvantage, to the point where some people, and maybe there are people where this makes sense for, but a lot of people are prescribed things in order to make them more, as you say, neurotypical, like more like a quote unquote normal person, right? Let's fix you. So it's very fascinating how society labels many of these things that you mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation as not good, when really these things and these conditions, we can call them, and these ways of being could actually be superpowers that set you apart from everybody else in a beautiful way.
Mm. Part of the reason why we think that there's something wrong is because it's not understood. So the environment that we grow up in labels it as disorders. So straight away we think there's something wrong, and we don't want to be wrong. We don't want to be like that because we're kind of put in the rejected part of the world, right? So who would want that? But it is a misunderstanding because, as you say, sometimes it is a gift and a superpower if it's understood and used correctly. When it's misunderstood, it causes a lot of problems in terms of how your self-perception. It causes you to think you're less than, affects your self-esteem, your self-confidence. And even that bit will stop you from even trying to reach your potential, or just trying to make the effort to go for your dreams, because you already think that you can't do it. Mm-hmm. And that's a mindset thing. So the way society has labeled it is a huge problem. But on the other hand, some people are incredibly disabled. So we also have to respect that as well, that it can be disabling to have certain ways of thinking in a world that is designed for neurotypical thinking. And yes, in those cases, we are fully entitled to get the right support, the right scaffolding to help us cope with those environments.
Yes. If there was one outcome and or realization that your work could give to society and or the world, what would that outcome be? What is the end all be all of the mission that you have found yourself on?
It sounds really simple maybe, but it's just for everyone to be happy and to accept themselves exactly as they are. Because a lot of people are in torment, they're suffering emotionally and mentally, and this is not necessary. So ultimately, I just want people to find that peace that you mentioned earlier, because I wasn't always peaceful, and it's a horrible place to live, and we don't have to be there. So with self-knowledge and the ability to advocate for ourselves and explain ourselves to others, we have that mutual acceptance. That's when we can find the peace and the harmony. Neurodiversity means that there are all different types of brains, and it's meant to be that way. We're all meant to be slightly different, because the world would not operate quite so well if we all thought the same. We need different thinkers for different purposes. We need innovators. We also need people who are just good at, maybe following systems. This is normal. So why we've labeled it as a disorder is very troubling to me. It doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
But where we are.
Yes. What would you say your superpower is then? Like, have you always understood yourself and understood your differences, or is it something that was a struggle for you growing up in your life? Because I know that you label yourself as neurodivergent. So what does that look like for you? When did you discover this about yourself?
It's only very recently, really, in the scheme of things. So I'm 47 now, and I have a 16-year-old son, and really it was when he came into my life that I started realizing something was a bit different about him. And I'd always felt different through my whole life, put it that way. But some of it was related to being Asian, I guess, living in, the UK and being the only Asian in my town. So already feeling out of place. Also quite a sensitive, shy kind of person. So I think growing up, I always just felt like, I'm different and who knows why, but I just am. And not actually thinking anyone else felt like this. Literally felt like that all the way through to my 40s. And so after I had my son, I did a lot of sort of self-exploration because we were having problems with his behavior at home, didn't understand him basically. And because I couldn't get professionals into to explain what it was, no one believed there was anything wrong. So there's a bit of like thinking, am I going mental? So no, I didn't realize that there was a brain difference because there was no one telling me that's what it might be. And when I did research, I thought it was ADHD. So I basically did a lot of work on myself, and I tried to find a lot of tools that would help my family because I wasn't finding it anywhere else really. And it was through that journey of realizing that he was differently wired, trying to get an assessment, actually getting a no for the ADHD, and then seeing him struggle through school. And then finally finding someone who actually recognized neurodiversity because of her experience in education. She backed me up. We got him assessed privately in the end to speed things up. And, he was diagnosed with autism. And it was, when I was looking at all the different traits, that's when I started seeing things in myself and things started falling into place. It kind of made sense. Yeah, that's why I've been experiencing the world differently. That's because I'm also autistic.
Wow.
So it was through not just learning about myself through like yoga, meditation, mindfulness, lots of self-reflection, but it was also because of my family being a mirror. They say people come into your life because they're a mirror for you, aren't they, to help you grow and to become more self-aware. So definitely my family was a huge part of that. And I think that applies a lot for a lot of my clients. That was the same. Their kids got diagnosed first and then they realized that about themselves. And then, you start going back through the generations, like your parents and back even further. And okay, you can't obviously diagnose them, but you start seeing all the traits. And so then everything just starts making sense.
Yes. Yeah. We have someone in our life too, he's a young boy. He's a teenager now. And he was always a little different, very, very intelligent, very book smart. Yet his mannerisms were different than those that we would define as neurotypical. So we always knew something was a little different, but it didn't matter, right? But as he's gotten older, we started to see some different patterns. And my wife actually did some research, and we came to the conclusion that this individual, and I'm being very vague just because, I don't want to put this person out there, but we came to the conclusion that this individual was autistic. And it helped us to better understand all of the actions that this individual took, even in his early stages as a baby. It's helped us to better understand him, have more grace with him and the actions that he takes and maybe the behavior that he exhibits. So this knowledge has helped us to better understand him and have more grace for him. How did this knowledge with your son help you to deepen your relationship, as well as how did this knowledge that you discovered about yourself help you with yourself? I know that's kind of a two-part loaded question, but I'll let you take that where you decide.
Okay, you might have to remind me because I can lose my train of thought, right? So how did it help with my son? It was huge because it's kind of like when you think about animals, for example, animals all have sort of different behaviors and they need to be approached differently and interacted and communicated with differently. And we were basically not communicating in the right way with him. And he also, because he didn't understand himself, he wouldn't be able to communicate well to us, so it's our responsibility as parents, adults, to do the heavy lifting and to make sure that we understand what we're dealing with here. And it was actually just a very sensitive person with who was very thoughtful, saw a lot of things that other people didn't see. He was also smart enough to be very controlled at school, and then come home and we'd see a different person, the person that would allow themselves to kind of what we call unmask and let their real selves out. And that looks quite messy as a parent. That looks messy because all the energy that they put in trying to fit in at school and behave a certain way is exhausting. And then you come home and you don't really want to do that. You want to come home and relax in your safe space. And unfortunately, that might mean that you've got no energy to kind of behave well, do the things that are expected of you, which I guess are not unreasonable, things like tidying up after yourself or just being polite and talking and having a conversation. What I realized was actually, he doesn't have the capacity for it because he's been working so hard all day to fit in and do what was expected. So when you think you can interpret someone's behavior as, they're being rude, lazy, what's wrong with them? Thinking like that about someone is not a very good way to have a relationship, as you can imagine, because you choose to talk to them in a certain way and you try and correct their behavior. When I understood what it was, then I had a lot more compassion. I had a lot more patience and space. I could hold a lot more space for him. I had more tolerance for some of the behavior. And that's huge for someone because they have that understanding, they have the empathy, they have the love to let all the pent up tension up, let it out. Once you let that out and you can recuperate and become yourself again, that's when you can start having a good relationship. You almost have to give them space to decompress, and then you see the real them. But if you don't give them that space and you're kind of always nagging them, telling them they're not doing things right, sounding disappointed in them, that really causes a bad relationship, as you can imagine, with anyone, whether neurotypical or neurodivergent. It's just not a good foundation for a relationship. So it's really important to understand why someone's behaving a certain way. And ultimately, what it comes down to is the behavior is communication. You need to take the time to understand, what's this behavior telling me? But it can be hard, right? It can be hard to decide.
Yeah. I think that's important advice, whether someone was diagnosed as autistic or ADHD or dyslexic or anything, just what you just said, not expecting someone to speak or behave or operate in the same way that we behave, but understanding that people are going to operate and go through their life in the way that they are wired and the way that they have taken all these patterns from their early life that have led them to where they are. So just having more grace and compassion and understanding with anybody, because the reality is, like, we're not going to have a deep conversation with everyone we encounter. So just realizing that we don't know the person across from us, we know them at a very surface level, and to have grace and compassion with every person we come across because of the way they operate, but also because we don't know what that person has actually been through in their life. You said something very interesting, and I still want to ask you about how this knowledge about yourself has influenced how you've gone through the world, because it's led you to where you are now and what you speak about and what you help people with as a coach. But I'd like to ask you about what you said. You said that your son would go to school and he would work really hard to fit in because that is what society wants, right? They want you to fit in and be like the rest so that you can make friends and be successful and all those things. So, but then he would come home and he would be drained of energy. It took a lot of his focus and willpower and strength in order to fit in while he was there. So how can we celebrate the uniqueness that is neurodiversity when we have to manage society's expectations of us at the same time?
I'm going to say that going through the school system makes it a complete nightmare. It almost makes it impossible because the phrase is you're trying to put a round peg in a square hole.
Yeah.
So there's no good way to do that, right? You're going to have some damage somewhere on that peg. and that's just not right in my eyes. And then the other part is, it's not quite so simple to answer that question, because every single person is so unique. And it's really, I think, about getting to know each individual, and allowing them to accept and embrace all those parts of themselves. So a lot of us have deep interests, for example, and it might be like computing, it might be fashion, personal development, whatever it is. We need to be given the chance to explore that without being held back, to go into what we love, because that gives us a lot of comfort. We do what we call, it's called hyper focus. We can hyper focus on it. It brings us flow. It brings us internal peace and happiness. So that is often missing for kids at school, because we have to fit in the school system. We have to, we're told what we're supposed to learn. We're supposed to sit a certain way, dress a certain way, talk a certain way. So people like us who think differently, if we behave differently, we get in trouble. So there's not really much room for maneuver. So if we're talking about kids, a lot of them end up thriving when they do something like homeschool, right, where the environment and the subjects and the teaching can be adapted to suit them. There's obviously some special schools that are set up specifically for neurodivergent children. But ultimately, what I see is going through a mainstream school system is really tough. And as a parent, you have to almost know what your child's needs are. And that might mean getting the assessment, getting advice about what sort of support they need. And then it could mean getting reports, and that report being shared with the teachers, the adults in their life, so that you're all working together as a team to adapt to the environment as best you can to suit that child. So it's quite a big job. And, a lot of us parents, I'm speaking from experience here, that is a huge job alone, and that can burn you out, because you're fighting against a huge system that doesn't work for us.
Do we have numbers and information, or even a percentage of what percent of our population could be considered neurodivergent?
I'm going to put my hands up here and not try to claim that I know facts. I've looked at the data before, and it's quite a high percentage. I think they say actually something like 33% of entrepreneurs have ADHD.
That makes sense to me.
That's one that sticks in my mind. But there are some very disturbing figures around children, mental health, and suicide. And I am, I'm not saying there's data that I can give you, but I know there's a big correlation between these children and their mental health, that these are neurodivergent kids that haven't been spotted. They haven't been identified, and they're not getting the right support, and they may be getting labeled incorrectly. They're not getting the social and emotional connection that they need just to survive. But from a sort of personal experience perspective, again, not numbers, but more qualitative experience, the more I found at the beginning of my sort of starting my business, my question to my mentor was, but I don't know anyone who is autistic as an adult. Who's going to want this service? I had huge doubts about, what am I doing here? And then as I started going out, like networking, talking about it, every single person seemed to know someone.
Oh, yeah.
And then as I start talking to people more personally on a one-to-one basis, more deeply, and they were able to kind of open up, it seemed like everyone I was meeting was neurodivergent, but we were all kind of masking it to fit in and to look the part and to make our work thrive, our business thrive. It was really interesting. So I think most people in the world are probably masking to an extent, but I think there's a lot of neurodivergents that are really good at masking, and you wouldn't be able to tell, at all. But I've realized there's actually a lot of us out there.
Yeah.
More so than not, maybe.
Sure. I just did a quick Google search. I don't know how they come across this number, but the National Cancer Institute says that 15 to 20% of people exhibit some form of neurodivergence. Neurodivergent conditions including attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder. And I don't like how they keep calling this a disorder. I think it's very
Right.
strange how they call it
Yes.
a disorder. What does that mean? Like this, it's very strange. And that language is something that we need to do. That's a government website that I just read from. And I think that was a pretty recent study. My question for you is this: is there value in someone who is neurodiverse going through the traditional school system while it's difficult so that they can better understand the other 75 to 80% of people who are considered neurotypical? Is there value, rather than taking them and putting them into a neurodivergent school where they're only around other people who exhibit differences such as them? Is there value in the hardship and the challenge of the traditional school system?
I would say 100% yes, but it depends on the individual, how resilient they are, what their support network is like. So I was one of the lucky ones. I got a lot more resilient. That's how I came up with, I guess, the phrase whisperer, because I don't naturally understand the social dynamics. So I would be able to observe, learn, develop the skills. And if I hadn't been in a mainstream setting, I probably wouldn't be able to do that, right? So it was very important that I did do that. But I had the capacity for it. Some of us don't. And therefore, well, is there any benefit for them to go into that mainstream environment? For those that get through it, some of us can pick up the huge skills of being able to understand a lot of the psychology. I think a lot of us end up being therapists and psychologists, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so there is a benefit in it, but it's not going to be beneficial if you don't have that support system in the background, the foundational support system, I would say. So again, it's not a straightforward answer, but yes, personally for me, it was important. For my son, even he says, I don't want to be treated different. I just want to be treated the same. That doesn't mean that in the background I haven't made sure that supports are there if he wants it or needs it. But we kind of have this ability to like push through, because I think from the day we're born, we've realized we've got to try a little bit harder to understand and fit in. So it's almost our base level. That's why we are so able to push through and do things that maybe neurotypical people can't. We're used to it.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's very important too in situations like that. Coming from someone who could define himself as neurotypical, maybe it doesn't mean as much, but we have the ability to create the story behind our difference. And I've met many people who have clear differences than others, and they create a story of why that sets them back. But I also know many people who have these differences as well, and they craft a story that helps them to move forward. And I believe that it's the story you craft that determines how you move forward, whether it's actually moving backward or not. So how does one embrace their differences? And let's say when you work with somebody and they say, Kanan, I'm just different than the people around me in my office. I'm different than the people in my family, the people in my community. How does one embrace their difference rather than allow that difference to hold them back?
So it's a huge journey of self-exploration and acceptance, and then you might be able to get to the embracing it and really going out there and even like what I'm doing, which is talking about it to help others. So at the beginning, it's hard. It's hard because that mask that you put up has served you really well. So it's hard to sometimes even distinguish who's the real me. Because you can think, well, that if I let that part of me out, then people will think there's something wrong or look at me weird. And the story then that goes through your head, which I've had the story, what's wrong with me? And I think that's a really common one, like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Because if you don't know what it is, you just think there's something wrong with you, right? But you don't know the answer.
Yeah.
And so changing that story to, okay, I just have a different operating system, and then learning your own operating system. That's the first step. to do that, you need to have a safe space. You need to go somewhere where people maybe understand your operating system or can help you to explore it without judgment, with a positive, affirmative kind of lens. You were saying, why is everyone calling it a disorder? That's what most people will call it, because they think it sounds like there's something wrong with you. So let's find out what's wrong with you. It's this disorder.
Yeah.
No, I don't go with that theory. I go with, how are you different? Let's look at all your differences, whether you see them as good or bad. I don't think anything is necessarily good or bad. I just think, they just are. And maybe they don't help you, and maybe some of them help you. So let's look at that. So it's about looking at, well, what traits have you got that are challenging you? And then how can we scaffold and develop skills to support you around that? And then also looking at, well, what are your gifts that didn't get to be looked at, appreciated, and nurtured, because all these problems, I guess, were showing up more in life. So, I say I'm a twice exceptional coach, because the added complexity of you've got these gifts, they're maybe even bigger gifts than a neurotypical person would have.
Yeah.
But they might never get to be shown the light of day, because you constantly have this story of, there's something wrong with me, or I'm stupid because I didn't get through school and I was always, seen as the lazy one, or the one that never reached their potential. Why don't you try harder? There's all these terrible stories around it that hold us back from even thinking that we're any good, never mind that we have these huge gifts, this high potential. So you need to do both. Yeah.
Fantastic advice. And it's so powerful, because I think that those questions, what are your gifts? What makes you different? What's special about you? Those questions are so important for people who are even neurotypical as well as neurodivergent. And I know we're speaking specifically on neurodivergence, but those questions could be asked of anybody, and everyone listening, whether you find yourself on the divergent scale or you're neurotypical. Again, I personally believe that, yes, there are 15 to 20% of people, or however many are out there, that I can identify as neurodivergent. However, I believe that every single one of us has differences. And I believe that when we take these buckets of what is typical or normal or divergent, I believe that's when we are separating ourselves. And once we can see every single person as different than us in at least one way, can we begin to move forward and work together, rather than prescribe a difference or prescribe a disorder, or especially give someone chemicals that will forever alter their brain chemistry because we see them as different, especially because that's a child that we're speaking to, and the child is going to listen to the person of authority in the white lab coat, who might actually believe, and who likely believes, they are doing the right thing by prescribing them something or diagnosing them with something. But really, we're moving further and further away from what will actually help us make forward progress in this. So I think those questions, what are your gifts, what are your differences, are so valuable. Let me ask you, let's say that we have a person in our life who is neurodivergent. Do we bring this up with them? How do we have the conversation with maybe a child in our life who is under 18? Hey, I've noticed that you do things differently, right? And we can embrace this. You can use this. How do you have that conversation with someone in your life?
Well, personally, I've always been very open about talking about things. So it might be different in other households. But the basis of having an open conversation with anyone is really important, right? If you've got that, then it's a lot easier just to bring up the topic. If it's maybe less easy and you don't have that kind of relationship, sometimes it's about leaving little hints, little videos playing, an article you're reading lying around, just so that it's like planting seeds. I think of it like, leaving little seeds. And so an indirect approach, maybe, rather than a direct approach, if you don't have that open channel yet, because over time, you can have built up a very tricky relationship where there's a lot of resentment and people just don't want to talk to each other. So at least bringing up the topic as, oh, what do you think? I've spent a lot of time looking at videos on YouTube, reading articles, and then I do the same thing with my family. So it's becomes normal. It becomes part of our normal. At the beginning, they might think, "What are you talking about? That's not me." I thought that about myself. I was like, "That's not me." I was like watching Rain Man in the 80s, and it's like, "What are you talking about? I'm autistic." But as you start reading more and more of real life stories, and on social media, there's so many people talking about their lived experience. A lot of people are just resonating, and that's how they're finding out. So again, it's indirect. You don't necessarily have to come straight out with it. You can be indirect in a gentle way about it.
Yeah. Even not labeling, saying, I believe you are ADHD or autistic, but letting them come to that conclusion on their own, similar to how you did when you're reading these things and you're like, is that me? Is that true? It wasn't someone coming out saying, Kanan, I believe you are autistic. You came to that conclusion on your own.
Yeah, I think that's the best way, because it's very gentle, and it's like gradual acceptance, and your own insight is always more powerful than someone else telling you. This is what we do in coaching, right? We don't tell people, we guide them to find out the answers themselves. And that's when the magic happens. So it doesn't matter if I went around telling people, they wouldn't listen to me, even if I was like, yeah, I think you are.
Sure.
They have to be ready to receive it.
100%. You've mentioned a few things that have helped you to better understand yourself. And you've mentioned things like mindfulness and yoga and meditation. Are there certain things that you recommend to your clients that they incorporate into their daily routine to help them to better understand themselves? And what are some of those things that you'd recommend?
To understand themselves, yes. I think the whole meditation, whether that's a specific type of meditation or just sitting still and reflecting in the morning, doing things like journaling, and just allowing free flow of thoughts, allowing that to come out. So not restricting your thoughts, which is what happens when you go out there, but just allowing any thoughts to come out and be caught and captured and processed. I also encourage people to do a gratitude daily practice at the end of the day, because you can acknowledge all the things that are great. It's easy to acknowledge all the things that are going wrong, right? But to acknowledge all the things that are going great for you, even if they're slightly different, that's important. It's about giving yourself that positive mindset. I think a lot of it is more about how do you find out about yourself. It's not necessarily just the daily journey, but how can you dive deeper? And sometimes doing that, you can't do that on your own sometimes. That's what I would say. Personally, that's what I've found. So you can get so far doing your own self-exploration. But I would say I've had the hugest jumps when I've had like a mentor, a coach, or I've been in some kind of group environment where we are doing a lot of deep diving into ourselves, whether that's physically, doing yoga, whether that's doing maybe like one-to-one. I go to rolfing, and I find that super powerful because it's connecting your body back to your mind and your inner sensations. So it's not just about using the mind, but also connecting back to your body. So exercise, I say exercise, but it's more about mindful movement, I guess, and getting back into your body. Because I think a lot of times neurodivergent people become very disembodied, whether it's from maybe traumatic experiences or just because they're very mind heavy. Sometimes I think of it as like people who are very intelligent can become a bit like, like lecturers. They're like brains walking on legs. They become very disembodied. And it's really important we bring all those parts back to have healthy balance. So yeah. Not just the mind, bring in your body, and also, if they're ready for it, some of that spiritual aspect. And when I say spiritual, I'm not talking about religious. I'm talking about why am I here? What's my purpose? How am I here to serve? Yeah. That for me is really important, because when you can connect to that, it can help you overcome some of that very, very difficult to accept difference that you have. because it connects you with something bigger than yourself, right? Helps you get over that. Helps you get over yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Was that question, was that spiritual practice something that helped you to leap from where you were in life before being a coach to now being a coach and serving other people? Like, I don't really even know how to ask this question, but how did you go from doing what you did to being a coach? And was that a result of a spiritual learning and or understanding that you took?
Without that spiritual aspect, I wouldn't be here where I am, for sure. I wouldn't be able to help the people I'm helping. That spiritual aspect is definitely, you know, there's something bigger than me. And even if I don't feel like I'm good enough or I'm powerful enough or I know enough, there was something guiding me. And that gives you a sense of trust and safety in yourself. And you trust the world, the universe, that you're doing the right thing by trusting your heart and what it's telling you, you're going to make a difference. So without that connection to what spirit means to me, I probably would still be doing what I was doing before, which was nothing like what I'm doing. You know, I used to be a buyer for a department store. I used to buy men's clothing. I used to sell the dream of, you know, if you buy these clothes, you're going to be happy.
Yeah.
I knew that wasn't sustainable. Right? Like now I know that's not sustainable. It was selling the illusion. And this is much more meaningful.
Yeah.
If I hadn't made that transition, I could still be, there's nothing wrong with buying clothes, don't get me wrong. Yeah. I love clothes, right? But it's not enough to live a meaningful life. And I know that the people that come to me, that's the most important thing for them. They want to be like living to their purpose. What are they here for in this lifetime? It goes deeper than the surface. You know, we don't want the small chat. We don't want these sort of insignificant surface stuff. We want to go deep, fast. How can we make a change? We don't want to waste the time we've got in this life.
Yeah.
So yes, spirituality has made a huge difference to me. What does that look like? You know, that can look a little bit like I don't believe in a God. I believe in a powerful universe that we're all connected. We're all one. We're all part of this system, and we each have a purpose. And that, you know, even if you think you haven't got a purpose, it's just that you don't know it. You don't realize it yet. And if you're seeking it, it's also seeking you. And at some point, you're going to figure that out. And so part of what I do is help people find their purpose, because I think that neurodivergents are here to make the world a better place. That's truly what I believe. And because it requires a different way of thinking, a different level of thinking, someone that can be brave enough and has the capacity to do things differently, despite all the constrictions and expectations that's been forced upon us. So yeah, that's how important spirituality is to me. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I'd be continuing to be probably a full-time parent and enjoying myself. Nothing wrong with that. Full-time parenting is a huge job.
Yeah.
But I feel that now I have this insight and this connection that I have the capacity to make much bigger changes for other people, not just my family. And that's more important to me than anything. That it's not just for my family. I started out this journey as how can I help my family and myself? But actually all of these gifts must be shared with other people, because there's other, if I went through these challenges, then there are lots of other families and people going through the same thing. And I can't bear the thought of that.
Yeah.
So that's what drives me.
Wow. What a fantastic journey you've been on. And it's a beautiful metaphor, the journey that you've been on, because you used to help people to feel better externally, but now you help people to feel better internally. And that journey from the outside in, like that's even a book title, Journey from the Outside In. That'd be really cool. But that journey that you've been on now helps people to find that inner peace and the inner happiness. But not only that, but you're helping people who are neurodivergent and neurotypical to better understand each other and ask that question of how can we help each other to make this world a better place collectively. Because the better we understand each other, the better we communicate. And if we had a world that understood each other, if we had a world that better communicated with each other, there wouldn't be war, there wouldn't be famine, there would be peace and forward movement. And that's a fantastic mission. And there should be more people speaking on what you're speaking on. But again, you're on the show now. I'm speaking with you. I've learned that neurodivergence is a thing. That term was foreign to me before I met you. And then I looked into what you did and read about you and saw your content. And I was thinking, why have I not heard about this before, especially when 15 to 20% of our population is considered neurodivergent? Again, we don't know where that number comes from, but let's roll with it, right? So you have your email list where people can join, and all they have to do is submit their email, and they can receive resources from you. They can receive communications from you to learn more about this and maybe to even better understand themselves. So where can people put in their email to join your list?
So if they go to my website, which is aspiecoach.com, and they can sign up there.
aspiecoach.com, and that is ASPIECOACH.com, aspiecoach.com. Okay.
Yes.
Now, for the person who is neurodivergent or who is maybe later in their life even, and they're saying, wow, I've been different my entire life, and this really just sheds a lot of light on that experience that I've lived. What does it look like for someone to work with you, and who do you love to work with? What types of people?
So I love working with twice exceptional adults because, as I was describing earlier, they not only have these challenges that have really held them back. So they might have ADHD or autism, Asperger's. They don't have to have a diagnosis. It's just they suspect because they have these traits that they've probably read about. But they also are hugely intelligent, maybe highly sensitive, deep thinkers. And a lot of them are actually very successful in business, in their field, whether that's tech or sustainability or science. They have these two parts of them, and they haven't been, integrated. And I help them to integrate those parts by exploring all of those facets. And what I love about is their complexity. They are so complex in so many ways. They have so many interests. They have the potential to be so many things, but yet they are often struggling in their personal life, maybe mentally, emotionally, because they're not understood. So when they get that understanding, that mirroring, acknowledgement, it's very liberating. And that is what creates the space for them to access some of that potential that hasn't been fulfilled yet. So they're already successful, but what they don't realize is they actually have even more potential. They didn't realize this other aspect of them was holding them back. So that's my favorite. The more complex, the better. People who have tried, they've done a lot of personal development. They've maybe been to psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, maybe even alternative treatments. I love it when they come to me because we've basically put all the pieces of the puzzle together and it makes sense. And for us, we need things to make sense so we can move forward. So I love doing this puzzle with them, the puzzling themselves together.
That's awesome. Where can people reach out to you if someone just heard that and they say, that's me? How can they reach out to you and start that conversation?
Again, they can just go straight to my website, and there's a button there they can click on to book a free appointment with me, where we can just check out if we might be on the same page.
That's awesome.
That's the first step. Yeah.
Super cool. So for everyone, again, that's ASPIECOACH, ASPIECOACH.com. Links are in the description for those who don't want to type that in. You can just click the link. And I also recommend you go connect with Kanan on LinkedIn, because she posts a lot of amazing content that you can just continue being inundated with and go through at your own pace if that makes more sense for you right now. But Kanan, this has been a very fascinating conversation, a very important one, and you're just a pleasure to talk to. So I'm really glad that Pierre introduced us. Pierre, if you're listening, thank you, brother. I appreciate you. And look at the conversation you helped create. So Kanan, thank you for your time. And I know this is just the beginning of you on your mission to make this world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Thank you.
Imagine a world where everybody, neurotypical, neurodivergent, regardless of where you live or your race or your gender or the differences that you exhibit, imagine a world where we can better understand and communicate with each other to create the type of success and lifestyle and fulfillment that we want to enjoy and create. We are making progress towards that world, and it's because of people like Kanan Tekchandani that we are making progress towards that end result. In this conversation, my favorite takeaway is the questions that Kanan asked, and I believe that they are valuable questions for everybody, which is what makes you different and what are your superpowers? What are your gifts? Because if we understand that and we understand that about the people who are important to us in our life, imagine what we can help them accomplish and imagine what we can accomplish as a result of that knowledge. I hope that you took something away from this conversation with Kanan. I know that I did. Be sure to go to the description below and check out Kanan's website, askbecoach.com, to start the conversation with her or to join her list for more resources. And if you did take away even just one thing from this conversation, please share this show with just one other person who could find this conversation interesting, just like I hope you did. You're the reason our show has grown, and we are grateful for you being the best part of the Be Better team. Until we talk again next time, continue to be better.